Welcome to the Life by Design podcast. We are your hosts, Jessilyn and Brian Persson. Are you and your partner looking to align your financial goals and build wealth together? Have you ever wondered what might be stopping you from confidently investing in real estate or growing your wealth as a couple? Or why it feels so hard to get on the same page financially?
That's exactly why we created this podcast and the Riches, Relationships, and Real Estate program to help couples like you invest confidently and achieve both your financial and relationship goals. Curious to learn more? Visit discoverlifebydesign.ca to book your discovery call and build your customized wealth strategy plan with us. Let's create the life you deserve together.
Today's topic, we're going to be talking about underestimating the true cost of ownership. You know, many first-time investors focus solely on the purchase price, only to be blindsided by a host of hidden expenses. And so we're going to talk through some of what those expenses are so you can avoid these when you decide to buy your real estate.
Yeah, I can't count the number of times I've been in a conference and meeting people who are either investing, in their first or second property, and they are still missing things in the budget. And we'll talk about what those things are, but effectively their real estate portfolio is underperforming because it's not really calculated properly.
Yes, that is so true. So we're going to roll right into the takeaways. The first one is that hidden costs add up. So know what to watch for. I know many of us are familiar when we want to buy real estate that we got to figure out what the mortgage is going to be. And to have that, you need a down payment. And then there are usually closing costs, which we know, of course, are legal. But there are a lot of costs which we learned as we were buying, such as appraisal fees, if needed, inspection fees. We're fortunate not to have this here in Alberta yet, at least, if ever. But like our partners in Toronto have major land transfer fees. Mm-hmm. And of course, once you have your property, there are things like property taxes, insurance, vacancy periods. I mean, the list just goes on.
Goes on and on and on. Yeah. And land transfer fees actually, so Alberta is the only province in Canada that does not have them. So come by in Alberta. Yeah. But a lot of people don't calculate what you just mentioned. They, like you said, are looking at the purchase price. And even when they're looking at the purchase price, all they're really looking to do is find a deal that's cheaper than the one next to it. And then all of a sudden their, legal, appraisal, everything else that has to come into the picture makes the property pretty well the same price, especially if you have like the unexpected stuff, like say your inspection takes more time because there's more issues, like maybe a crack in the basement. So all these things start to add up and you end up not saving any money by trying to be cheap on the buy.
Oh, absolutely. I would highly recommend to always have an inspection fee or not fee, but an inspection done. And I mean, they can save you thousands of dollars by finding hidden things, which homeowners do hide, right? And they can be incredible costs. Like you said, a crack in the basement, a crack in the foundation, essentially could cost you upwards of $50,000 if you have to get that foundation replaced or more. And $50,000, if you can catch it in the inspection, you have a choice to decline buying that property if it's just not going to work for you, or now you've got a large negotiating tool with the sellers to be like, hey, I need you to reduce this cost of the foundation fix. Mm-hmm. So then your buy will be cheaper, so that in the end, even if you do decide to buy it and fix the foundation issue, your purchase price is still going to be the same because you got it back from the buyer before you bought it.
Yeah. I can tell a story that has, some good stuff and some bad stuff in it. But when it comes to inspections, we use one of the, I would say he's the top real estate investment focused inspector here in our area. And he came and inspected one of the properties that we were purchasing. This is years ago. And he was running his little camera down the pipe to see what was going on like in the sewer lines. And he came to this one point and he saw this little divot in the pipe and I remember the moment clearly, like he turned around and he said, "You haven't put this property under contract yet, have you?" And I was like, oh crap, because we had already put it under contract and we were just going through our diligence. We knew the builder and we knew he did good work. So we weren't too terribly worried, but this problem was actually not in the building itself. It was actually out into the sewer line. And sure enough, like this guy who warned me about maybe not purchasing this property, he was somewhat right. in the fact that I have to have that sewer line augured every single year, and it cost me $300.
Yeah.
But also, the property ended up being a total gem. Like, so we've far made our money back on it, but I did have to spend extra time and costs in order to just keep that property maintained because of that little divot in that pipe that our inspector saw for us. So super important to have a really good inspector. And you might like not like the cost of a good inspector, because this guy that I'm talking about, he's quite expensive, but he will find everything for you in that property.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, a few grand up front, I think in general probably is the high end of a good inspector.
Yeah.
But that is so worth your investment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And not only that, he will come back with like an investor focused laundry list of deficiencies with that property, which you can then go back to the buyer and negotiate with. So yeah, it is a hidden cost that the inspector is going to unfold for you, which you can then actually use to your advantage.
Absolutely. And things like appraisal fees, sometimes you need them, sometimes you don't. Sometimes the bank, it's included with the bank.
Yeah.
But just if you have it budgeted, at least if the bank comes back at an appraisal that doesn't meet what your expectations were, now you have in your budget to possibly go get a private appraisal done. And then that's a comparison you can take back to the bank, right? So you always want to have room in your budget for the negotiating side of what you need to make a deal land. Yeah,
I've had to do that. I've had to go and get secondary appraisals just because the bank was trying to be cheap on what they thought property prices were in the area. It's something that happens. Yeah, a big killer though is property taxes. We have friends who there's a neighborhood around our area that has very high property taxes, and for whatever reason, people still buy real estate in that, or like real estate investments in that area.
Yeah.
And the exact same property will be $7,000 a year in taxes for our area, which is only $3,500 in taxes, literally double the taxes. So you imagine holding that property for 20 years. Well, you do the math, right? How much extra have you just paid for that property? That you better make sure that, what is the rough math there? 60,000. You better make sure that property has an extra 60,000 built into it so that you can make up for those taxes.
Yeah, taxes can really get you.
Mm-hmm. And insurance, when it comes to multifamily, can be a deal killer. The realtors will give you their insurance numbers, but often they are old or perhaps haven't been updated in a while. And so when you go to your insurance on a multifamily building, all of a sudden the insurance prices are way higher than you expected, and the deal stops making sense to buy. So insurance can be a deal killer that people will just assume is going to be the same as whatever the current property is paying for. And then they actually get their own insurance and they end up being underwater with that deal.
Yeah, and you don't want to have properties without insurance, because that will be a much bigger cost if something goes sideways.
Oh no, that don't do that. Let's just scratch that from the record.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But some people will try to do it. So again,
tenants, actually, this is on the flip side of things. Tenants should have their own tenant insurance as well.
Yes.
That's a hidden cost that can add up more often than not for you, but sometimes there's some implications for you as the property owner. To give you a quick story of a tenant that had tenant insurance when she moved into my property, and at some point she canceled it. Then we had a flood in the basement, and she ended up having to move out. And I was working with her, like walking her through like everything that she can do to like, minimize her costs and like get into another property as quick as she can and yada, yada, yada. And she was being very squirrely about my advice. And finally I said, like, you do have tenant insurance, right? And she said, no, I canceled it. And it ended up costing her, my estimate is about $3,000 extra, which at that time was pretty well 2 months of rent for her. So you can imagine the, $15 or $20 a month that she could have been paying over those few years turned into a $3,000 tab on her end. Yeah. And it could have turned into a liability on my end, depending on if how she came about it. So super important for not only you to have the proper insurance, but your tenants to have the proper insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. Second takeaway is that maintenance is a must. And there's a lot of maintenance that can come down on any given property, and definitely over time, because we buy and hold. So we don't have a 2-5 year turnaround. We hold ours for 10, 20, 30 years. And as with anything, there's always wear and tear, and there's always going to be maintenance needed.
Yeah. A lot of people don't include maintenance into their budget. Ours is 5%. That seems to work for our property. Sometimes it's 6%, but there's never any like ground shaking differences in how we budget our maintenance. But it's critically important. You're going to have appliances go. You're going to have little things happen all the time that need paint or a new door or whatever it comes down to. And if you're not budgeting that, your real estate, that deal might look like a disaster depending on the year. We have a property right now that we went through a significant amount of maintenance. It's part of the plan. We have a 2-year plan on this property to like bring it to the end of its current mortgage, and then we're going to refinance it, pull out a whole bunch more money, and buy another property with it probably. And so this year looks disastrous when it comes to the maintenance because we've been putting a lot of extra money into it purposely. But when I kind of freaked out when I saw the numbers when we were doing the budgeting. And then I went back through the last 3 years and I realized like it was bang on right in the plan of that 5% that we had created. So really, really important to have that number in mind all the time and make sure that it's like nice and even across all the years, and not just like aiming for 0 one year and then like 10% another year. If you're going to do that, make sure you know what you're doing.
Yeah, like you mentioned, like roofs leak, furnaces break, appliances go. I mean, if I look at where our current home, we've been here for coming on 14 years, and knock on wood, we have not had to replace an appliance in 14 years. But throughout our properties, I know we had a property, I think it was last year, where we had to replace 3 appliances. Yep. And you can't necessarily predict that. Sometimes it's wear and tear. Sometimes it's just a faulty unit. But we know for sure appliances at some point will go. Yeah.
And this is where tenants like are both your best friend and also your worst enemy, because tenants, I find tenants do take okay care of the appliances, which is great. But what I find is that when you have tenant turnover, the property has kind of a personality and a lifestyle of its own, and the tenant has a personality and a lifestyle of its own. And every single time we have tenant turnover, something goes on with one of the appliances, and simply because they're just using it differently. Like they're not abusing the dishwasher or anything like that, but they're just using that dishwasher differently. And sometimes the dishwasher will go like pretty consistently. It is like within a week or 2 of the tenant moving in. So keep that in mind when you're looking at maintenance costs, because it could just be the fact that the tenant is turning over and not actually the fact that the dishwasher is old or whatever appliance is old.
Yeah, for sure. But statistically speaking, and I know you've shared the story before with one of your doctor buddies, and I'll let you share it, but like if you have 25 properties, for example, and you don't have a furnace go for say 5 years.
You think you're golden.
Like you're making money, but statistically speaking, what's going to happen?
Yeah. That's where I say like, make sure you got that maintenance budget like locked solid into your plan, because if you do have 25 properties, 1 month at some time during the ownership of those 25 properties, you're going to have 3 furnaces go in the same month. And it's probably going to be the coldest month and it's going to be brutal.
And that's about $15,000.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you don't budget for that and you're not thinking about that on that scale, then like you're really going to suffer some pain when it comes to those problems. So always have that in the plan, always have that in the budget. Keep your float nice and high where it should be, like your float of money, so that like if you do have a couple furnaces go across your properties, you have what you need to cover it. Like this property that I just mentioned where we had an unusual amount of maintenance on it. We replaced the windows, but I had planned for it, and the float in that property was able to cover the window costs. So like it wasn't all of a sudden 1 month I'm $10,000 in the negative because I'm running my properties a little too lean. I had it all planned out and budgeted so that there was no hidden costs for those windows.
Exactly. Plan and budget. And then it won't matter if something hits you offside because you're prepared for it. And that's one of the things you really got to make sure when you're owning real estate property. The third takeaway is remember that rent is your biggest expense. So manage your tenants well.
Yeah. So what do we mean? What do we mean by rent is your biggest expense? I don't think most property owners think this way, but if you go a month without rent in a particular property, that is a huge hit to your underlying like portfolio. And the thing is that most people just look at rent like an income, but it's actually going to like significantly deter you from having a good deal when you don't have rent. So it really, I look at it like an expense. Like I can go a month empty in a property, or I can replace a water heater given the prices around here, right? Which would I rather do? I would rather have a new water heater and work a little bit harder and make sure that that property doesn't go a month empty.
Yeah, I like an example you shared with me. This was quite a few years ago now, but just to give an example, if we were charging, say, $2,000 a month for rent, and I was hesitant about us lowering the rent to fill the vacancy, your great explanation was if we go 1 month empty, that's going to cost me more than if I lowered the rent to $1,900 a month and rented it for the 12 months.
It's actually lower than $1,900 a month.
I know, but as an example, right? And that's when I went, okay, yes, reduce the rent if that's what was our hang up for renting it. But like, I don't think many owners look at it from that perspective. They're like, well, no, I need to make $2,000. And they get so set on that amount that they realize 1 month gone, they've already lost over that just for the year that they could have been charging $1,900 instead. Yeah.
You said it perfectly. Like, I need to make this amount of rent, right? And so they're looking at, my expenses are $2,000 so I need to have rent of $2,000. Well, if you go 1 month empty, like you broke the bank right there. So like take the $1,900 because at least you're then only a little bit out and not a lot. And you can always raise rents later on. One of our mentors, Don Campbell, I remember one of the first conferences we went to years ago. He said exactly that in the conference. He was like, people go buy a property and then they go look for the rents that they need for that property. It's like totally backwards. You need to know the rents for the properties in that area and then go buy a property that matches those rents, as compared to like trying to backfill the rents into a property that maybe you love, but maybe doesn't work for you.
Yeah. And I think that lends well into doing proper rent projections, like not overestimating potential rental income, right? So do your research on what rent is going for in that area, in that neighborhood, and see if you're in the ballpark. Because if you're not, you might sit vacant for months trying to fill it if you're not willing to lower that rent.
Yeah. We know quite a number of investors that are more than willing to let their properties go vacant for a month or two, sometimes longer, depending on the market.
Yeah.
And to me, that doesn't make any sense. Like I'm right now, I have a tenant that's only been in there for 6 months. And the reason she's in there for 6 months is because, like, number one, I'm not going without rent for any of those 6 months. Whereas I had to rent in the winter, I could have gone empty for a little bit, but I was also able to like carry myself over into the spring. So now I've filled all my months with proper rent. In fact, I got more rent out of her because it was a short-term tenancy, and I've lined myself up for spring. Some people would just probably coast right on over the Christmas season and leave it empty, and totally does not make sense for me. In fact, I've gone through some pretty extreme lengths where most of our properties are suited properties, so we have a basement suite in them. And the first time this happened, I actually didn't like conceptualize it when I actually put the plan in motion. But what happened was I had an upstairs tenant moving into the downstairs of the same property, and then obviously a new tenant moving into the upstairs, and the current downstairs tenant moving out. So effectively I had 3 moves in one property across 2 suites in one day.
Yes.
And guess what? I made it work because the alternative was that I'm, $1,600 or $2,000 or more out of pocket. And if both of those suites went empty, then I would be $3,000 or $4,000 out of pocket. And that to me was way less acceptable than having a kind of a stressful 12-hour period and making sure that I got those properties filled.
Yeah, I agree. I do remember that day. One thing I don't think a lot of owners are considering also when doing their rent projections and managing the expenses of rent is utilities. Now, some include them with the rent, some it's on top of the rent, but regardless of how you choose to collect that, you need to be conscious of the fact that there are utilities, which are an expense that you may get stuck paying if you don't manage it correctly.
Yeah. And if you're in a cold area over the winter anyway, like we are, make sure that you have a budget for like the different seasons, because you're going to seem to underpay throughout the summer, and then your bills for utilities are going to be crazy high over the winter. And some people don't budget for that. They don't like average out the utilities across the year and understand what really should be in their bank account to manage those high utilities in the winter.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets awfully cold here in the winter, so yeah. I think the furnaces go up and stay on forever. Mm-hmm. Which I can't blame them. I'm one of those people who do that here. And then while we talk about rent being one of your basic expenses and to manage your tenants accordingly, if you are hiring out the property management, then maybe you're not directly managing your tenants, but you still need to manage your property managers, because the cost for tenant turnover is going to eat at your profit.
Yep. Understand what your property managers are doing and have regular meetings with them. Don't abdicate your responsibility with your property managers. It will take time to manage your property, even when you have property managers. So don't ignore that cost.
Yeah. And so when projecting the profit on a property that you're looking to purchase, I know we've talked on quite a few costs that will come up when you're buying a property, but make sure to include in your pro forma when you're creating them, as we mentioned, costs that are not necessarily so in your face or prominent. Like you said, maintenance fees, you always want to make sure. Vacancy, you want to include. Yep. Property management, if you're not going to be the property manager yourself, how you're going to pay yourself. I'm not sure if there's anything I'm missing there.
No, you pretty well got it. Like if you manage your own property, that it becomes extra important. Like if you're a brand new real estate investor and you're buying your first property, you don't want property management, you want to do it yourself, great, that's fine. But put the 10% in for property management and make sure the deal works with that property management fee in the deal. Because if you decide that you're going to manage it and the deal only works without that property management fee, well, 5-10 years into the future, when you don't want to manage your property and maybe you want to like have a little bit more vacation time, now you have to put that 10% into the budget and the property might no longer work. So I tend to run my numbers fairly conservatively in the sense of like, I probably put in more numbers than people think is necessary. Yeah. And that includes property management, vacancy, even though we are renting in a pretty well a 0% vacancy neighborhood and time right now, the vacancy still goes in there. We talked a lot about repairs and maintenance, and then I actually put in what I call an asset management fee, which is an extra 10%, and that's the money for me and our family. Like, why are we in real estate? I need some way to like measurably pay myself out of the real estate, and the asset management fee is 10%. And if the deal doesn't work with that asset management fee in there, then I don't do it. Right? It has to have enough money to pay us as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, just doing quick math based on the 10% property management, the 10% asset management, your maintenance fee, and your vacancy, say those are each 5.
You should be at 30 or more percent.
Yeah. So just keep that in mind when you're budgeting for your property, and whether it's actually cash flowing in your favor or only cash flowing because you have excluded and now have risks
Oh, yeah. I've seen so many performers that don't include any of these numbers. And as soon as you add them in, the property's underwater and it doesn't make any sense, which is probably part of the reason why over the last few years here, coming out of the pandemic and like everything's starting to stabilize and then having inflation and all this turmoil kind of going on over the last 4 years. We've talked to a lot of investors where finally this year they're like, my cash flow is back, right? 4 years later.
Yeah.
I'm like, where did it go? Like, why did your cash flow go anywhere? And I think part of that is just the way we run our numbers. Like our cash flow is so secure and the property is so well budgeted that there's really not an opportunity, given all the turmoil, for the property to actually go into the red.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So I'm going to recap our takeaways. The first one is, remember that hidden costs add up, so know what to watch for. Number 2, maintenance is a must. And the third one is, rent is your biggest expense. Manage your tenants well. In our next episode, we will be talking about failing to plan for the unexpected, which is one of the 5 mistakes we discuss in our free giveaway, the 5 fatal mistakes when buying your first investment property. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Life by Design podcast.
Before you go, don't forget to visit discoverlifebydesign.ca and book your discovery call to build your customized wealth strategy with us. We release new episodes every 2 weeks, so be sure to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast app and join us on this journey to create your life by design.
Thanks again for listening. It's been a pleasure being with you today. We're Jessilyn and Brian, and we'll see you next time.